Third Age Babylon 5 podcast, once again with a special, and this time a long-awaited special, or at least we've been teasing it for a while. Today it's time for Earth Alliance History 101, and as you can see, I have Meike with me, our resident newcomer, and I will say star student of this class, because she's literally the only student. Layla can't join us today because she's very busy, and I think this leads us immediately to kind of our introduction bit here. We will not be doing an introduction question, but as you will have noticed, we have been working on a bi-weekly schedule, or trying to work on a bi-weekly schedule for a little while, which is simply down to the fact that we are both busy, but also kind of stubborn. We are getting to this point where there's a lot of episodes ahead, which we consider very important and very good, and where we just want all three of us present to talk about them. But that's hard to keep up with the schedule. So we are trying our best and trying to fill the void in between with specials just like this one. But it does mean that we will not be here every week, but rather every 14 days. But we figured the show is 30 years old, so we can be patient. Everybody who is a fan of the show has learned to be very patient, waiting for reboots and such. Anything you would like to add for that?
You said this perfectly, so I'm just happy that we're back on track with this and hopefully be able to keep it this way.
Yes. So the big question is, what are we going to do today? And because we're not talking about the big new episode, we will be talking about the universe in general, a little history of the Earth Alliance based on this wonderful book. I don't know if I've shown this off before, probably because I'm very happy that I found a physical copy of it. The Earth Alliance Fact Book by Moongoose Publishing. We will take a closer look at this later on. We will take a look at Earth Alliance history in general, and we will do so because we don't want to just quote Wikipedia articles. We will do so in a little bit of a little game. So maybe we introduce those rules first, and then we take a closer look at the book. What do you think?
Yes, sounds good.
All right, so
the game.
We wanted to avoid this being mainly just an episode of me reading Wikipedia articles at you, because as much fun as I would have with that, I think this would get a very boring lecture. So instead we are going to play kind of a little game. And this has also to do with the nature of our source material, but we will look at that later. We will touch on a few big milestones of Earth Alliance history, and each of these is going to come phrased as a question that I'm going to ask you. And I'm very curious what your answers are going to be, because out of the three of us, you are the one who has the most, I would say, experience dealing with stories and literature and world building in particular. I happen to know that you are passionately collecting an entire book series on world building. So certainly you have some ideas of how the world building of Babylon 5 could go. You also have some experience with science fiction universes that are based on Babylon 5. So I'm sure you have some interesting ideas there. And then we will compare what the good people writing the Earth Alliance Factbook came up with back in 2003. So there are a good 20 years of real-life difference between these two perspectives. Also, the people writing on this book were, much closer to the original run of the show. So I'm expecting that there might be some differences, but some similarities, which will be interesting to talk about. And of course, we will also always ask ourselves, does this do anything for the show? Is knowing what kind of housing market the colony of Denham 4 has really a big improvement, or is all of this more kind of fluff that would be, fun to have as a fan, but doesn't really affect the show? So this is what we're going to do, and hopefully reach some kind of conclusion. Although I can promise you already, we will not cover all of Earth Alliance's history today. Not even by a long shot. We will start at the beginning and see how far we can get in, but a lot of things happen. It's a thick book and it's a long history, and so this will be something that we are tackling as best as we can. In this case, in true historian fashion, are you ready to go into some critical perspective on our source material? Yes, we covered the introduction part, so yes. One thing that I still wanted to include in the introduction part is, why are we taking this history lesson now? That is not just because it conveniently falls into the gap that we have in our episode recordings, but I think you might have noticed in Season 2, the status quo of the show is slightly shifting. You've already seen Confessions and Lamentations, so you know that things that were around stop being around. So things are not going to be normal going forward, which just means this is a good opportunity to take stock and kind of ask ourselves, well, how did we get to this point? Which is, something that hopefully we'll get to answer today. So this is why we are looking at Earth history now. And as we continue through the show, we will touch on more things on Earth Alliance, and that will also make it more convenient to look at later parts of Earth Alliance history. So hopefully this will all beautifully intersect. Okay, now onto the source material. You are familiar with role-playing games of all kinds. You're also familiar with tabletop and pen and paper and all that kind of stuff. And I'm happy to report to you all of this existed for Babylon 5 as well, in multiple iterations, which is the first thing that probably everybody wants to mention if we look at this book. Anything that Moongoose Publishing put out is not canon. This is, unlike the books and the comics, not something that has been sanctioned off by J. Michael Straczynski himself. This is something that was written after the fact, in this case in 2003. Which is for us very important insofar as it means that we don't take this as the holy gospel. This is just, for our purposes, ideas that people had about what the world might look like. Other role-playing games in Babylon 5 exist. They have sometimes slightly conflicting accounts of what the history looks like, but honestly, in the broad strokes, I have yet to find a difference that is really fundamental. But it just means that our ideas are just about as valid as whatever is in this book, because neither is considered canon anyway. All of this makes sense so far?
Yes.
All right. Then that covers one of our big bases. The canonicity of the source is dubious at best, but we will judge for ourselves what of it we consider worth keeping and what we might maybe want to throw out. And part of this is certainly going to be the second base. This book is from 2003. It is somewhat outdated because of that. And this means it's, for example, a role-playing game that was based on the D20 system and, in general, has a lot of the makings of many classic RPGs at the time, which means you have character classes and you have character backgrounds, you have different races that you can select, and for a game that is settled on real Earth, you can see where that might be kind of awkward at times. You have like a big table of national traits where you get some of these ideas like, if you want to play a hard-working character, you're probably going to play a German. And I don't say this to be mean to the author, which is Bruce Grau, by the way. I should probably mention that. A few other people have worked on this book, but he's the main mind behind this. This is not to be mean and be like, you wrote bad things in there. This is just to acknowledge that, sensibilities have changed over time, over 20 years, and not everything that is in this book would necessarily be considered completely up to date. This is also just done to the fact that this book tries to tell a history from the 90s forward, and we have lived beyond the 90s a little bit, so some of the historical events might stop lining up. That is something that sci-fi histories just have. So far, still makes sense?
Yes. I have to hold back the whole time to not call you sensei.
Oh God. No, I promise I will stop talking, because now we actually go into the history itself, and I will start, before we go to the first milestone, with the more general question: why do we look at fictional histories like this at all? Why is it interesting, if at all, to ask yourself questions like, what does the history of Earth in the Babylon 5 universe look like? Because that's more than 2 steps removed from reality. It's not necessarily the most normal thing to be interested in, maybe.
The point of having a background for a story is that there is a bigger picture that you can draw ideas from, explain why things are happening, and also how things develop. Because if you have certain starting points, of course, they change. We have, you already said the status quo is changing, but it's changing because of things that happened. We already talked about the Narn and the Centauri. history. And yeah, the point is they had this problem for so long that wasn't resolved. And yeah, therefore this is the explanation for what we see now in the movie or the series. And overall, it just enriches the world to have something like this. I mean, there's a reason why Tolkien's works are held in so high regards, because he thought of so many things of this world, not just the language, but the history, the people, how this world changed. And you see this in his stories, because he had done this pre-work. The story is this good because he thought, how do the people act? What do they value? What do they fear? What kind of legends do they have? Because this all impacts the people, the creatures, and of course how they act and live. And therefore, yeah, it is always important to have this kind of backstory when you start writing something like that, or producing something like that. And of course, you always see if someone hasn't done this kind of job, usually, not always, but most of the times, the story that is presented is lacking, because it's easier to fall in loopholes or problems, because you didn't think of this previously.
I mean, this puts us in a very interesting perspective, because now we are sort of trying to reconstruct all of this work that was done before, right? Like, Tolkien has very meticulously written about the world that he has created, both in the actual books and in all the apocrypha around that, and forwards and such. And J. Michael Straczynski doesn't have this to the same extent. There's a lot of commentaries that you can listen to, and a lot of scripts for the scripts for books that he outlined, scripts for the episodes, of course, that he outlined. But there isn't as much of a world history that he himself wrote. There are like specials and stuff that go a little bit into this. But essentially, like, we are now trying to fill all of this back in with the knowledge that he probably had ideas about all this, and fleshing them out is kind of a nice way of appreciating that, I guess.
I think it's always, the longer you think about a story, a work, then yes, I think this is always some kind of appreciation, because you think about the world, about the story, and try, even if it's just for yourself, to put light in the dark spots, or at least that you see or realize are there, which is also, if you think about stuff like fan art, fan fiction, the whole fan works that are out there, which unfortunately some authors and people like that do not really understand how much appreciation is in this kind of works, because they just think about it in their own perspective, and what this can give people more to enrich the world, but also the experience they have with the story and the work.
And I think this is also something maybe we should highlight at this point. Like, we are going to condense a lot of what is in this book, and we are going to cherry pick the things that we consider important. But of course, this is a book written for a role-playing game. Like, the entire point of this book is to tell stories beyond what is written in the show, to essentially create fan fiction in a way. So obviously, many of the things that we will gloss over are very valuable to that. They're just not what we're going to do. Who knows? Maybe someday we will get crazy and try actually playing the Babylon 5 role-playing game, and I can't wait to be a Pakmara adventurer at some point. But for now, we are still in the process of watching the show, and so we are using this extra resource that just exists there, and is a fun little detail for that.
I think the hard point for me, or the tough point for me, will be later to separate, okay, this was original canon in the series, and this is the information I'm getting now.
But I mean, this is also why we are talking about this very much through the lens. What do you think are the answers to these questions, and what alternative answers does this book provide? Because so that it's already enmeshed in this idea. Like, many of these answers are kind of open as far as the show is concerned, and we just get a broad direction of things that you might be able to think about. But it's not about like nailing down hard canon facts in the same way. Which is something personally that I quite enjoy about Babylon 5, that it has not as much of a very rigid framework of canon like other franchises sometimes tend to have, which can generate a lot of rather unnecessary conflicts, I would say. But that's a different topic, especially when it comes to like visual canon and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course, you can have the other direction. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in an earlier recording, but I kind of dislike how J.K. Rowling is going with her take on her own works on Harry Potter. I mean, what really stuck to me was when she was giving out little tidbits of new informations about this world, and that seemed more like, I'm now still developing this world, which is if there's no really good story coming with it, a bit boring. But the most unnecessary information she got out was that in the early days of Hogwarts, where there was no plumbing system, the wizard and witches just relieved themselves on the spot and just whisked it away with their wands. And yeah, that's an information I really needed that enriched the story and my experience of this world. Please, no, don't do things like that.
I mean, in such cases, in such cases, also such a thing, because now it's to the actual detriment of the story, because now you're just portraying ignorance towards like any kind of history that you base this on, which is just kind of a shame. Like, I mean, to bring this back to Babylon 5, like, this is something that Babylon 5 specifically kind of avoids trying to go into this technical detail. Like, what speed does a Star Fury go? It's the speed of the plot, and that's good enough for this. Like, you don't get as many like very technical details in this setting, because in the show itself they are not as front and center as in many other sci-fi shows, and that automatically creates a little bit of more leeway where the extended canon and stuff that you get is more concerned, with the big movements of history and this kind of thing, rather than trying to figure out the minutiae of how things work, because honestly, like, that doesn't matter all that much.
I mean, of course, it's an interesting thing to lose yourself in, like thinking about this. Okay, how does this concept work? But it is not necessarily to know for the story to make it a good story. It's like, I mean, you could just fake it, like with Star Trek. Hey, we go on warp 8 or warp 9 or whatever. You don't know how fast this is, but you have some sort of scale, and okay, they are flying pretty quickly through space, and that's enough. You just have to construct it in a way that you believe that it is working. I mean, this is like, I don't know. A car is working. Couldn't explain exactly what part is doing what, but it is working, and that is perfectly enough to keep, to keep my mind silent about crazy thoughts. And the same goes with a story. Just the outer construction has to work to make it understandable.
I mean, especially if you go into this example of everyday thing, like, you want also to have interactions that are in any way, shape, or form natural. And, if you ask an engineer a random question on the bridge of a starship, he's not going to rattle off the blueprints of the ship to you, because that is not useful. Like, there's a reason why in naval terms you have like an entire nautical speak of like shorthand and quick quips and explanations for everything that is happening, because you don't want to go into the actual terminology of the technical thing that is happening right now. And yeah, I think Babylon 5 like manages to sidestep this kind of stuff fairly well, which is not to say that it has no place. Like you say, this is a beautiful thing to lose yourself in, and there are entire communities out there still that are figuring out ship designs and alternate versions for technologies to work in this setting, because yes, that is also something that is fun. It's just something where you can tell that, you know, J. Michael Straczynski is still very active on various social media platforms talking about the show, but he's not talking about like which bits and balls go where on the station. He has quite literally more important things to do as he's trying to write new stories. So that's just a nice thing to see. Okay, that's plenty of a preamble in true historian fashion. So want to go into some historical milestones for the Earth Alliance, into some History 101.
Let's start.
All right. And we start, of course, at the beginning. The very first pages of this book are a history of the Earth Alliance in broad strokes. Don't worry, there is a history for every major nation that is part of the Earth Alliance as well. If we ever want to go into that and like really learn about the Indo-Chinese developments in the 22nd century, that is no problem, we can do that. But for now, we will be talking about Earth as a whole and Earth Alliance as a whole. And just as a quick reminder, even though it is constantly in the actual opening of the episodes, we are in the year 2259 as of the second season of Babylon 5. But how, like, this is pretty far into the future, but how far into our future is Earth Alliance founded? How far back would you imagine does this sci-fi organization of Babylon 5's Earth reach?
Usually usually an alliance or any kind of connection is forged under certain circumstances. If it is a threat, like Earth having to face a new enemy or whatever, or resources, that's usually a reason. Or if you need more people, like funding for going to space, not this little tidbit shit that is happening now, where there we have a little group and there we have a little group. I mean, we could manage to or achieve so much more if we just got together, but the problem is that there is still too much difference and arguing to get on the same page. Therefore, and because I think humans are generally stupid, I would go for that. That there was the threat that, like, when the Centauri came around or stuff like that, Earth realized, or something like that time, the first alien contact, that Earth realized, okay, we need to have a point where we all get together, because we can't keep doing our own shit, everyone over the place. Therefore, we have to organize something like Earth Alliance. But don't try to say me in something like a year, because I'm really, really bad with that. So I will skip this and
I see.
Avoid this through the whole game.
No. Year numbers, as in real history classes, aren't actually what all of this is going to be about. Although I do notice that I have asked this first question in an unfortunate way, because you lumped in the second question as well. But that is fine. We will get to talk this. But as you talk about like the motivations for Earth Alliance, I think I can quote you on that. Like, if by the time of the Earth-Minbari War, Earth wasn't united, then they definitely would have done it in the face of that. So okay, that reasoning is strong to me. For this one first question, would you like to wager a guess of something approaching like a year number? Like, is Earth Alliance 50 years old, 100 years, 200 years? Like, how close, I mean, maybe this is a better way of asking this question. How close do you think the point of divergence is where the Babylon 5 timeline says, okay, now something must definitely happen, so Earth Alliance is on the way? Like with Star Trek, the funny thing is always that the first point of divergence for Star Trek is the eugenics wars that happened in the 90s. So we are already not in the Star Trek timeline because we know that didn't happen.
Will you help me out and tell me how long ago the Minbari War, the human Minbari
That's
War
just
was?
10 years ago.
Just 10 years ago.
So that we're very young.
Yes.
I mean, I can give you another hint. Sheridan's father was a diplomat for the Earth Alliance already. So it must be longer than that.
Oh,
This is the only time I'm this mean about one of these questions.
yeah, that's I think that the problematic there is for me is I'm not sure how to judge the technical advances
Mm.
at this time, because I mean right now we in our lifetime we experienced this. I mean, when we were kids there was no social media, there were not any vids out where we were doing stupid things as little kids, and we saw this development that happened really quickly, especially compared the time before, or the historical time, and it's going quicker ever since. Therefore, yeah, I can't really judge this how quick the technical advances, or overall the science is developing.
An engineering history of Earth Alliance in Babylon 5 would also be interesting. We can maybe
Yeah.
try and talk a little bit about when does like the really cool technology come in. But I won't torture you any longer with this question and reveal to you that Earth Alliance is founded in the late 2080s. So it's actually not that far off. It's a fairly early thing. So Earth Alliance, by the time of Babylon 5, is actually a pretty old organization. And I have this little quote here. I've abbreviated all of these because, my God, this book is wordy. It's almost like somebody like me has written it and just rambled on for the entire time. But yeah, the good book says throughout the late 2080s, the United Earth Alliance gradually took shape and became known simply as the Earth Alliance, so technically United Earth Alliance. In 2087, it's officially ratified as an organization during a big conference in Geneva, which later turns into the capital. We know this from the show. And a notable little detail here is during this conference where Earth decides to unite, there are notable holdouts that do not participate, including Russia, China, India, Pakistan, France, for some reason, Egypt, Libya, North Korea, less surprising, Vietnam, and basically the entire Middle East except Israel. For you and your musings about the reasons when Earth Alliance comes about, this might be interesting, and I've noted this in some details, in some note points here. This happens before Earth really goes into space colonization and long before first contact with the Centauri, which is something that you actually mentioned might be an inciting incident. But no, this is Earth on its own, not really even expanding into the solar system yet, and not all of Earth is actually on board. It calls itself United Earth, but it isn't really. There are some major, especially very populous parts. Like at this point, the majority of Earth's population is not part of the United Earth Alliance. At first glance, any thoughts on that? Is this surprising? Is this different, usual? What do you feel?
Yes and no. I'm kind of surprised that it is not something major that presses for doing something like that. On the other hand, we're not given enough information about the current state of Earth, like what it is with the resources and stuff. Do we need starting to look out for outer space because we're we're running out of space on Earth because the population is rising like mad.
I mean, the next question, I can tell you this already, is going to be that, well, what is the reason then? Like, there is a big decisive incident. It's just not first contact. It's not going to space, something like that. It's something different.
Then maybe before we go on with this, I would like to go back to the states that didn't participate. I mean, of course, there are even from today's point of view that are kind of logical. I mean, Russia, I don't think we have to talk about this one right now. North Korea also. China, I'm not sure. On one hand, I think they would be interested to go in this direction. On the other hand, considering how they were, the constellation is right now, I can kind of understand that again. India is something, not sure.
It's kind of a toss-up usually, right?
Yeah. I think what's really strange for me is France. I mean, they're like, I don't know, did Le Pen win or stuff like that? I don't understand. I can't imagine France not being involved in something like that. Because they are. I would consider them a really progressive state, therefore, or a nation. Therefore, I'm not sure. Egypt, Libya also. The point is the whole Middle East except Israel. There's a snoring cat.
Yeah, there's a cat that is slightly with a cold, but cuddly still.
You have to give her a different name. For now, she is Darth Vader. Yeah, but on one hand, you can kind of guess. Okay, on the other hand, it's a bit. I don't know. I think it's a bit strange. Some choices, and on the other hand, we don't get in this kind of information who exactly is with Earth Alliance at this point. Maybe you have it at a different.
Essentially, everyone else, like the big players is the US and by extension most of the Americas and most of Europe, with the notable exception of France. South Africa also has like a big block that goes in there. I mean, for all of these nations, I can tell you, like, legitimately, this book does have more detailed answers. There is a story in there, like, why France is the way it is. But just looking at it in general, what appeals to me in this is that half of these picks I'm also looking at, and I feel like, that's a pretty, like, reasonable prediction to make as somebody looking at world history. It's not, a tall bet to say North Korea is probably not going to join the world government anytime soon. But then, like, other picks are thrown in there, which I feel like, it's kind of cool to say something weird is gonna happen in the time between this book being written and 2080 when this actually happens. Well, so at least I will give points for creativity on that. Just in a more general term, though, I'm most of all firstly surprised that we're talking about something like an Earth Alliance, and we talk about the fact that this doesn't happen all at once. There are nations that are opposing to this, and like, how often do you see a sci-fi universe written by an American that talks about what India is doing? Like, at all. Like, usually this never happens, and it's like a good portion of people, of the entire population on there. So the fact that it is concerned with that in any capacity already, like, was one of the main reasons I'm very interested in Babylon 5's history, because man, they actually look at Earth as Earth and not just, this is North America and Europe and they're doing stuff.
Yes, what I'm really surprised there is that you have, obviously, that Africa is a part of this, because usually, at least it feels to me like that, Africa is usually forgotten. Like, this is this, I don't know, back country place, like, I don't know, like the place where your old grandma lives that you can don't have to visit. This is the next storm will crush it. This is like the feeling I usually have in this kind of constructions, and therefore I'm quite happy to see that it is part of this alliance, that they said, yes, we're part of this. We're playing with the big guys. We in the position to do this, which is also not granted usually. And on the other part, it's like, we have the Asian continent, where obviously a really lot of nations said, we're in on this, and of course what I'm kind of missing is that the ones that are mentioned that are not participating from the beginning, that all the smaller ones are in on this, which also feels like, do you just not mention them because they are the small ones? Like, okay, they're in on this idea because they're little, they don't have anything to say.
To be fair to the author here, he's like talking about this in terms of notable holdouts. There's definitely gonna be more. Like, if he says Russia isn't part of it, I'm gonna assume Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and such are also not in there, which the book does acknowledge that, in the beginning there's like more than 200 nations in the world and all of them are doing their own thing. There's just not room to touch on all of them, so I'm gonna give them that.
Okay, if it's mentioned, then I'm fine with this. I didn't mean to nick it there, but
no, this is, I mean, you're also like getting an abbreviated version of an abbreviated version of an abbreviated world history. So there are going to be points where I made omissions that I just need to mention to not be unfair. Also, there's going to be omissions in this history because I can't. We will talk a little bit about also why the big nations are being mentioned here, because as already teased, of course, if I'm asking when it was founded, if I'm already telling you, okay, it's not in the context of first contact, then the question is still very much, why is the EA founded? And there is a small tidbit here that by the time the Earth Alliance is founded, or the United Earth Alliance is founded, the United Nations have been dissolved. And the reason why the United Nations are dissolved and the reason that the Earth Alliance is created is one and the same. And so the question is, what is that reason? What could it possibly be? You've already talked about maybe it's running out of resources and such. I can tell you it's not really that, but what could be the reason?
There was another war on Earth.
Yes.
That would be my best guess, because if it's not about us against them mentality, it's usually that stuff like that happens after a major incident, and if it's that much people or in this case nations that get together and form an alliance, it's certainly has to be some sort of world war.
It's the sci-fi classic World War III, responsible for wiping the slate clean if you really want to do it. And this is what makes it fun to me, because I'm usually I think of World War III in sci-fi in the Star Trek way, where it's a convenient way of getting rid of nations and all that, to create this clean slate and say, now I can start talking about the politics of this world and I don't really have any connection to the politics of the real world. But we've already seen that's not really the case here. Like, all the nations and stuff still exist after that war. But yeah, you're right on the money. Like, it is a mentality of us versus them. It's just, not humanity against aliens. It's united Earth humanity against all those others that don't want to be united with us. There's a whole big bunch of detailing here. So there is a nice chronicle of World War III in here. Just a few points that I would like to highlight. One is what sparks the Third World War is a conflict between India and Pakistan, which, I guess, in the 90s is a conflict that is much more on people's minds than maybe nowadays, but they are two nuclear powers, so they certainly have the capability of doing so. I just still, as we already talked about, find it refreshing. Hey, here's a conflict that is not involving the US or Europe or, any of... It's not another, let's do World War I or World War II again. It's actually a conflict elsewhere in the world that matters and that people get involved in, which is nice to say.
We have to bring them to the other land.
Yeah.
That's the missing part, and I'm really, really happy about that.
Then we have this thing... always with World War III, the usual issue is, but we all have nukes now, right? Like, why does Earth survive this? And incidentally, this book actually makes this a key point, that one of the reasons World War III can even happen is that an incident happens and people try launching nukes at each other, and those nukes just randomly explode mid-atmosphere. And now suddenly it's a conventional war again, and starts getting into this years-long drawn-out conflict or fighting and such, which is really ugly and terrible, but it does not destroy all of civilization in one fell swoop. It's not a nuclear war because of that reason. And it's revealed that this is a project that the US have been working on. This big, kind of Reagan-era space lasers, a big satellite field that just takes down any kind of nuke that is fired. And I find this interesting. I'll be curious what you think about this, but it's interesting that, this is a book still very much written in this post-Cold War era where the United States is very much like the powerhouse of the globe, although, 9/11 has already happened, so it's already moving away from that. But it creates kind of the situation where the United States has this ultimate power of stopping nuclear war from happening. But that is what dissolves the United Nations, because essentially all the other major powers, in response to this satellite network existing, withdraw from the United Nations and say, well, great, the fundamental principle that our peace was based on, this mutual assured destruction, is not a thing anymore. And then the whole thing falls apart.
Well, on one hand, the idea of enabling this ability of destroying each other with weapons is a nice idea. Feels almost utopic. What I'm missing there is there are so many other ways to fuck each other. You can, we're with the globalization. We felt this with Corona going on. Suddenly we still feel it. There are shortages on medics, and I'm not sure if it's still going on, but there was a time where wood supplies were really expensive because everyone was buying like crazy, and embargoes on trade, on even on just on financial, we no longer accept your payments in your currency. It's a bit, I think it's a bit more complex. Maybe I'm just seeing everything black and white there, but and don't want to believe in this in such a simple solution. But yeah, that's a bit of problem I have with this. Even though it's a really nice dream to have, that there is a point where there's no longer a way to destroy each other with weapons. So I think humans will always find a way to kill each other.
I mean, you say these things with full confidence because I think you're right on the money there, and you're touching actually on exactly what this book also kind of does, because we are very far removed from the Babylon 5 universe now. We're now talking about, 21st century history in this setting, but I think thematically this still for me, this feels very much like Babylon 5. You have this idea, what if we develop this amazing new technology that takes nukes out of the equation? Surely this will be a great thing for peace in the world, right? But in the story as it is told here, this is what enables World War III to happen. This, the nations notice they can't destroy each other, so we have this massive conventional war that goes on, and everything you just mentioned is in there. Like, the global market crashes, like, everything that is described about this war is about, China trying to launch a massive ground offensive into Russia, and promptly with the first winter it goes horribly wrong, and like millions of people die because disease and hunger and everything goes haywire. Like, the world is absolutely devastated after this war, despite there not being nuclear weapons. So in a very Babylon 5 way, we already had this episode where the girl from the past wakes up and gets told, oh, the future is not what it used to be. This feels like it's right in that theme, where we have this amazing new technology, but guess what? It doesn't automatically solve anything. And, this amazing technology that you would think, oh, cool, maybe this can unite everyone. The immediate reaction by everyone else is to say, well, it's unfair that you have this technology. I'm going to remove myself from the United Nations now. Earth is more divided than ever. It does fall back into, you're completely right there as well, into a kind of simplistic solution afterwards, where it basically says, okay, I have the quote on that, where it's basically said, the United Nations didn't work. They were ineffective in preventing conflicts, which 20 years later, after this was written, can't really argue with that. It's not going so great, the track record. But essentially the reasoning that the Earth then gets out of this is saying, or that the US gets out of this is saying, well, we need a project like United Nations, but it needs to be properly armed. And they just basically sell, okay, the United States military and this like anti-nuke button is now the core of what would later be called the United Earth Force, and then later just Earth Force. Which, this is a very simplistic solution. Basically, the most powerful military in the world says, we are not fighting for this country anymore, we are fighting for world peace, and that resolves things.
Which is a nice idea, but the problem, again, is it starts on one nation, and not necessarily the ideas and ideals of one nation has to align with that of another one.
Yes.
Therefore.
But for me, this would be a massive problem, and this was a setting like Star Trek that wants to explain to me how the beautiful utopia comes about. But we already know that's not the case. We already know that Earth Alliance doesn't really have ideals always that we 100% agree with. We see this like much later on the actual show of Babylon 5. And knowing this backdrop now, I can see why India decided not to join this. I can see why, a big plot point here is that a lot of other nations look at this. Maybe also France looks at this and says, well, that's not really US being our ally anymore. That's them just kind of creating this hegemony over humanity, and people not being a fan of that. It makes sense to me. It's obviously, massively simplified, no doubt about that. But looking at this as a milestone in Earth Alliance history, I think it's a fascinating way of explaining this is how you create a catastrophe that is big enough for humanity to unite. But this unification is not this like joyous occasion that solves all problems. It, in fact, just creates a massive new one.
Yes, if you look at the European Union, it was create. At some point, they said, "Hey, we're gonna use one currency for everyone," which is basically a good idea. But if you have no backup plan, it's a stupid idea. I think it was it Austria? I think that I once saw a documentary where they one of these nations said, okay, we're keeping our own currency for the trade within our nation. And therefore, they have more stability on the long run. Because if the euro is getting unstable because of whatever crisis is happening, then they still have the stability of their own trade currency. That's one thing. And on the other hand, they started putting the trade up front, but what would have been more important would have been to think about, okay, what are our ideals, or that where we come together, where we can totally agree on everyone that is part of this. And that is missing, and I think this is also why it is, of course, not the reason, but one of the reasons why it is now and then getting really problematic, especially if we're talking about people who have to migrate into the European Union because of war or whatever it is.
And I mean, I think this is also such an interesting example, because this book is written as the European project is much younger than it is now, where, in 2003, I think the idea of a major nation leaving, it has completely different connotations than something when we think about Brexit right now. So I think in that way, it's interesting that it already foresees a lot of these issues that go along with this, because, the euro as something, and the credit in the Babylon 5 universe is born as the currency of the Earth Alliance or United Earth Alliance long before all nations are part of that. It's once again this idea. Now the Earth Alliance once again simplifies this a little bit, puts this further, that you can essentially imagine over the next 100, 200 years, these nation states are gonna become more and more obsolete, to the point where by the time Babylon 5 rolls around, you have more this idea that a few super states exist that have kind of gobbled up all the smaller nations. And this is also the point where we come back to the point that you already mentioned. Many, many smaller nations are just not mentioned anymore. And this kind of implied that they exist, but, depending on what part of the world you're looking at, you might imagine that, the European Union, like Germany, still exists, sure, but it's also kind of lumped in with the Benelux, and they are more or less one and the same. Although there are notable exceptions for this. For example, long before Brexit is a thing, it's noted in this book that the United Kingdom always stood alone from everything else, never joined the European Union properly, never joined Earth Alliance properly, and even by the time Babylon 5 is built, still has it's still separate from the European Union.
Well, I mean, we have the Switzerland, which is through all war was staying neutral, because okay, there's a big reason for that, because they're armed as fuck and try to invade a country or a nation surrounded with really, really huge mountains. If you don't just want to nuke it away, I think there is no option to conquer that.
I mean, this is why is the capital of Earth Alliance in Geneva? Because this stayed true even through World War III. It's the one place nobody really touched. Yes. But yeah, I'm just looking here at a list of the Earth Alliance Senate, and there you can kind of see how things have been folded into each other. You have the European Union as kind of this big thing. The United States is now lumped in together with Mexico and Canada. It's kind of one big thing. And you have the South African coalition of nations, United Islamic Nations. So you can see how the world has been simplified into 5 or 6 big power blocks, which is a simplification for sure, but on the other hand, still much more than we get in virtually any other sci-fi setting. So I'm still happy with that. And
of course, it's logical to come together to make, if you have more people on the same idea, you are more likely to achieve something, because you just have so much backup. I think this is a bit problematic because there's, if you think about the world now, there's so much cultural and even ideal differences. On the other hand, this is like, yeah, a few hundred years in the future. And I mean, the globalization is taking part, at least it feels to me, like on a completely different level than a few years ago. I mean, we're getting K-pop now. That is really having a big impact on Eastern, Western countries where I think a few years, no one, there's this Korea, and they have a bit of beef with the other part of the former nation, but that was about what was it about it. And now it's more like, through the internet, through the connections that are being made, through thinking more in a global sense, and of course also the news you get from all over the world. I think it's a bit more merging overall. Maybe just my superficial opinion on that, of course, but I could imagine that this is going even further, like 200 something years in the future.
I mean, definitely. At the same time, I also think this is one of these points where Babylon 5 definitely, but also this book, I think, leaves this open to some degree, where essentially all it's saying is, okay, these super states exist now. We don't know like how independent the individual nations are within that, and that can be very varied. I mean, Germany is a federal republic. Bavaria is a lot more autonomous than something like Hessen. Like some of these lands just have a much stronger emphasis on preserving their own like political identity and like having something in there. What is definitely mentioned, because we see this also in the show, even though Russia as the Russian Federation doesn't exist anymore, it's a Russian consortium which probably encompasses a lot more people. You get people like Ivanova who consider themselves Russian and make their identity about that on multiple occasions and talk about that. Like it's also this thing, just because on a political level these nations are less and less important, isn't to say that culturally they don't preserve themselves in some way, or maybe split up again or get more homogenized with globalization. Like all of this is definitely on the table.
And of course, with every generation, the perspective is changing. I mean, if I think back on your commentary on, if you want to play a hardworking character in this pen and paper world, you would probably play a German. That may have the stereotype may have been some sort of right in the past, like when my grandparents were still working and going in the mines and starting to get the economy back on track after World War II. But now it's like the generations now see how broken those people were, how sick they are, how they did not live and therefore are broken also mentally, and saying, no, we don't want to repeat this big mistake. We want to live in a way that doesn't break us completely to a point where it's better to die than to live. And therefore, we sitting in this position now saying, this is how the people would develop. You can't say this for sure. You can just decide, okay, for this story I'm making, I say the people change in this direction for that and that reason.
And I mean, a lot of this is also down to practicality, right? Like you put these stereotypes a little bit into stasis, because if you reference somebody being Russian in Babylon 5, it's not helpful to the audience if you then say, oh, here's an addendum of why Russia lived like through these different like temporal and historical changes, and so now the association with Russian mentality is completely different than what you have in your time. That would be more realistic, but as a writing tool decision, absolutely terrible, because now you've just made a reference in the text to something that nobody will understand without reading the glossary. And it's usually not the greatest thing to do. So
then you have to create something fictional, putting various countries together and say, okay, we give it a completely new name that no one knows about. Then you can start addressing new stereotypes. I mean, there's a reason stereotypes exist. Of course, it is wrong and partly lazy writing. But on the other hand, if it's not a bad stereotype, then in this context, I would say it's kind of okay if you don't write on it all the time.
Especially because it's Babylon 5, an imperfect setting that, the people in Babylon 5 deal in stereotypes all the time because they're people like us nowadays. So it makes sense that the world building will also touch on that. How reflected it is in that is a different matter, but it's definitely there.
Maybe just a short commentary for stereotypes. I mean, writing concepts. I know this is really, really off from the sci-fi section, but if you think about if you have like stories from the Brothers Grimm, you have like, this is the archetype of the witch, this is the archetype of the princess, this is the archetype. You use these kind of stereotypes, archetypes for writing because it's understandable for the one who is reading it. That's also like, if you think about dramas, it's also the same. I have to admit, I'm not really watching Western dramas, but I really like watching dramas from the Japanese or the Korean TV, and they usually have this kind of structure that is, like really repetitive in its use. And where there are minor changes, but it is done in that way because it is something the viewer is used to, and therefore understands the story without problems, and therefore you can focus on other things and make the changes more important.
I mean, it's all about the question, like, how accessible do you want to make your story, right? And we begin this entire thing by praising the meticulous world building of Tolkien, which is out of the question that it's amazing. But there's a reason why very, very many people have read the Hobbits and really enjoyed it. There's a good portion of people that enjoy the movies quite a lot more of Lord of the Rings than the actual books, because those are already hard lead. And then how many people are like really getting into the Silmarillion than from Fair and Forward? Like, this is the probably highest quality and greatest franchise example of this, and even there it's very noticeable that there's a steep incline in accessibility, to the point where, when you get to the Silmarillion, you can really ask yourself, like, yeah, sure, it's fun to go through this if you're really into that, but there would have been ways of telling these stories that maybe would have reached more people if you really wanted to. So I think this is always the considerations, and I think this is just something nice to mention, because it's very easy to dismiss something like your TV drama or your soap opera because, it's easy entertainment. Well, yeah, it is in ways, but it's also doing what entertainment is supposed to do, which is being comfortable in a lot of ways.
And again, it's important what you do different and what you want to tell or to show the ones who are consuming this.
But now we've talked a lot about like the broad strokes of Earth society in here, which I'm glad that this is so fruitful. But in your very first answer, coincidentally, you already laid out like a nice framework of like the part of Earth Alliance history you're looking at. You talked about, I asked you about when is the Earth Alliance founded, what might be the reasons for that. We've talked about these two things now. You also mentioned first contact and getting into space, and this is what the next two, and these are going to be the final two milestones that we're going to be concerned about. So one of these questions is, how does the Earth Alliance go into space? I mean, you can imagine 2080s, the first thing the Earth Alliance does is rebuild Earth because the war was terrible, and then growing. Like, uniting Earth is not something that happens quickly. It takes until the 2000s, until at least nominally, everybody is in the Earth Alliance. And even then, it's like how everybody is in the European Union now. That doesn't mean that everybody is fully on board with these ideals and is not looking to do their own thing or, you know, throw a wrench into things. So all of this is very, very big asterisks. But at least nominally, at some point this is done, and then the Earth Alliance goes into space. And the question to you is, well, what does this look like? What is the big project that Earth Alliance does in total in space?
Oof. Well, I would presume that at this point there is something, a really, really impressive version of the ISS.
That would be really cool.
And yeah, the probably, I mean, the closest thing would be looking closer on the moon. I read now that there was found some holes. Seems wrong, but yeah, kind of like a ditch in the outer layer of moon, and where it is supposed possible to live there. Kind of like, I didn't really had the time to read it, but yeah, like since it's the closest, I would say we go to the moon, even if we just build there like some science facilities, or like I think in Mass Effect it's they have some kind of archive there. Or was it Mars? I'm not sure. Yeah, like stuff like that. I could think that they would like, hey, we put the top secret stuff there, or we like, yeah, we have this cold treasure trove with all the not seedlings, but where we can get our
Kind of this genetic arc, right, where you can recreate everything from.
Something like that, maybe with information, with knowledge. Maybe I'm too optimistic on that take.
After World War III, there's a strong case to be made that stuff like this is necessary. So I think you're not far off there.
Yeah, but maybe Mars then next. I mean, yeah.
I mean, we know from Babylon 5 that Mars is a major colony, right? So that would make sense. Well, okay, I think you're right. Your mind is going in exactly the right direction. I mean, to be fair, like going to the moon is maybe not the most high-end speculation there. It is right next door. Then I'm very curious what you think about how the story is told in this version of Earth Alliance history, because you are completely right. We go to the moon and we go to Mars, with the asterisk, though, that those are things that are being achieved with the existing infrastructure. So the American space program, the European space program are the active ones that do this, which has the negative side effect that these colonies are founded, but they're not really Earth Alliance colonies at that point. Even though nominally it's all, you know, part of the Earth Alliance, they are seen as European and American victories and things of pride. The thing that Earth Alliance...
What could go wrong?
What?
What could go wrong?
Right? It's definitely not set up for a horrible rematch or anything, but everybody else is extremely jealous of them or something like that. Funnily enough, and I think this also for 2003 is maybe a bold prediction to make, bolder than it would be nowadays, is the idea that the first time something beyond nations goes into space is the asteroid belt, and then it's private investments, SpaceX going there essentially. And you already mentioned like resources. It's a treasure trove of resources they really get into. And yeah, the belt is really where the good stuff happens. Like the big colonies on the planets, those are more kind of national ventures, but in the belt, there's a million tiny rocks in there, and people do this on their own. I don't know how much of Expanse you've ever seen, but the idea of a Belta alliance coming about is like a huge thing there, and Babylon 5 has exactly that, essentially.
Capitalization at its best.
Can you see how this might lead to problems?
Of course, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think I don't want to get on with this topic because
I mean,
that is a rabbit hole.
I can tell you why I chose this, how it relates to the show. Because, I mean, of course, you can expect in the show colonies on Mars and Moon are there. And obviously, by the time Babylon 5 rolls around, Mars isn't an American colony anymore. It is just Martians at this point, although it might explain why, people who come from Mars tend to be very American because, we're the first ones there. You do see here kind of what you might expect. Sure, the South African Alliance is part of the Earth Alliance, but they don't do as many things in space in the beginning. They have much more to do, like getting stuff done on Earth. China is rebuilding, part of the Earth Alliance anyway, so their space program is kind of on ice. So this is where you kind of start getting an explanation of, okay, this is supposed to be Earth Alliance. Why are there so many American actors in Earth Alliance, right? And this is kind of this in-universe explanation of saying, well, they just kind of had a head start, and Earth Alliance isn't the great equalizer, so you don't automatically get to go to space just because you're nominally part of it. Which sucks, but in a way that is very in line with how Babylon 5 portrays its future.
Yes, but of course you have the cultural point there. However, it looks in 200 and plus years. The problem, though, is it is still very male, very white.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's no proper explanation for that. I mean,
the only explanation.
If you talk in Europe, you have every gender, every skin color there. Therefore,
the only explanation that really makes sense for that would be to say the reason they don't show up on Babylon 5 in universe is the reason they don't show up in Babylon 5 in the real world, which is just societal prejudice, which we just haven't overcome, which, it sucks and would be great to see different in this show. But on the other hand, I have it easy. It's easier for the show to sell this to be than a show that tries to say we have all become equal and overcome these societal issues. We obviously haven't, and there are reasons for that. Still sucks though. Still would have been a nice opportunity to see. On the capitalization, or do you want to comment on that?
I think just maybe it will be a point later on, but I would have at least wished for that it would be addressed. That is still a problem, and we are aware of that.
I can promise you this is the case. This might be a little bit later, but don't worry, you will not get spoiled for everything in the show. But we will have news station reports on Babylon 5 where they talk about that, for example, the Indonesian consortium is having repeated discussions with the rest of Earth Alliance where they are very mad about the fact that so much money is being thrown into space and not into developing, the nations on Earth equally. So the show at least very openly says Earth isn't equal. Like, the reason people aren't in space everywhere is because people aren't equal in this society. We haven't managed that. It's still an issue. That doesn't touch on the more inner societal part as much. We'll see how much the show comments on that later on. We do have the whole telepath thing also going on, which I guess you can use as a metaphor for a lot of these things as well. That humanity just has not figured out how to do, like, oh, there's people among us that are kind of different, but kind of not. And, humans are not good at that in this show. It's a recurring issue. We have like secret police forces because of that. It's bad. On the capitalization front of that is, the belt, because it's like this Wild West essentially for a long time, also becomes a prototype sort of for a lot of things that you tend to see later on in Earth Alliance as well. The first raiders, for example, that kept harassing Babylon 5 come about in this place. They're kind of space pirates that are like raiding asteroids to get resources. This is also why the Belters form their own little Belter Alliance, the first sort of self-governed colonial faction that tries to police itself. So this idea that colonies are being founded in space that aren't directly under the control of Earth politics and Earth governments happens in the belt. And I think that is a very potent idea, and especially for 2003, one that you don't see so much, because the next best example of this that I can think of is the X-Bands, which is much later down the line, and then really tries to go into this. It would be interesting to watch the X-Bands as just kind of a prequel to Babylon 5, because I think up to a certain point that works actually quite well. We were talking in the beginning very briefly about, when does the cool technology really come in? This is all before that. Like the book describes the first Raider War, the first time that like Earth engages in any kind of fighting in space, and it's very much this like, oh, we have the tech level of the ISS and try to destroy each other. It's very violent, but there's also very few people involved because not many people are living in space. It's a really weird time for them, and very far removed from like artificial gravity or beam weapons or anything like that.
The funny thing is that when you start explaining how everything is going on in the belt and this like Wild West mentality, I could just think of that's when you have no rules, when there's and that's the problem. That's also a problem I see like with like SpaceX, because you can there are no rules out there. You can just regulate what's happening here, but you can't go like, okay, let's see and check what they are doing out there.
And especially, I mean, this is something that we see with a lot of, tech-related corporate kind of stuff, that politics has a very reactionary stance on that. Like, we will see how to regulate social media once problems arise in social media and we have to have like a precedent set in court. Like, disinformation gets dealt with, but only after we have at least one election that's massively fucked up because of it, because then we decide, oh, somebody should do a ruling on that. And it's the same with like copyright questions in AI. It's the same with like corporatization of spacefaring technologies and stuff. It's usually this thing like, we will figure out how the legality of claiming asteroids work as soon as the first pirate attack has happened, and we have to deal with it now. I think thematically it's just kind of an interesting thing, because the Earth Alliance gets found under this idea we need a military that can enforce the rules, because doing it without that military hasn't worked. And then as soon as it expands into space where this military doesn't reach, you get immediately Wild West again. It immediately falls apart. I kind of like that, as it feels very realistic, quote unquote, where you can see that Earth Alliance has this concept and it just doesn't apply everywhere, and that's kind of a shame. For the last milestone, and this will bring us, I can give you this hint, it will bring us back to the point, the furthest point in the future that you mentioned. It's the question, why does San Diego get blown up? A quick question there, do you remember San Diego being blown up?
Yes.
Okay, we had like the news article about that in the San Diego wasteland we saw already. I'm just, very broadly ask you, why is San Diego blown up? How is San Diego blown up? Why is a random American city getting blown up? Just with the hint, this is going to tell you a lot about the state that the Earth Alliance is in, which is also the state that it is in when it makes first contact with the Centauri. This is where we get the connection back to stuff that we've actually seen in the show.
Hey, my first idea would have been, okay, someone was trying to develop or experiment on something and it went really, really bad.
Interesting. Okay.
Maybe that's just popping up in my head because it's long ago my partner showed me something or told me something about a man who made an experiment. I forgot what the experiment was about. The important part, of course. I just know that at some point it went really, really wrong, and that person realized that, and it was like, okay, we can now call everyone that's important to us and say goodbye, because in the next like few hours we're going to die. And yeah, even though experience change and the precautions that are taking place are getting more and more important, but there's always a stupid idiot in the room that thinks, I don't need this, or I know it better, or I know exactly how this is going, and then fucks it up royally. But yeah, your reaction gives me the vibe of, no, this is just a nice idea, but that's not the right answer.
I wouldn't say that. It is the right answer with like 2 or 3 extra steps, I would say. And I'm just kind of trying to put a nice bow tie on everything that we've been talking about, because it harkens kind of back to the beginning also. Santiago is destroyed.
And then I would go in the direction of the game Ixion, where they have developed this amazing technology where they can start this really, really huge spaceship, and when they start it, they crush parts of the moon that then turn into asteroids and destroy Earth. Maybe in this direction, like, hey, we developed something really amazing. Look, oops. Sit down.
As a plot point for Babylon 5, I would buy this in a second. Like, if you tell me this is like Earth Alliance opened its first hyperspace gate and accidentally nuked Santiago in the process by like throwing a big asteroid on it, that might as well be true. Like, I would not be surprised by that at all. I mean, the story as it is given is slightly different. I think Sinclair already mentioned in like when he talks about a series of like cowardly surprise attacks, he mentioned Santiago already. Santiago was the biggest victim of a terrorist attack that got its hands on nukes. This book being written in 2003, you might imagine this is still like very much under the influence of, oh shit, the Soviet Union has just dissolved. What if like some of these nukes go missing? Because they had many of them and we don't know how stable this nation is. And this is kind of what's happening here. It's this idea that Earth Alliance is going into the belt. It's developing a bunch of new cool technologies from that. So you're completely right on that people are experimenting with dangerous shit. They're just doing that a little bit more safely. Nobody accidentally blows up an entire city because of that. But member nations of the Earth Alliance that are very skeptical about the Earth Alliance, you know, your Russias, your Indias and stuff like that, they start building up their own weapon stocks on that and like try building their own militaries and stuff like that, because they are ultimately still looking for this opportunity to break Earth Alliance apart again and get a rematch. And as part of that, as part of like everybody developing new weapons and stuff gets missing, somebody gets their hands on a nuke that shouldn't, and boom, accidentally Santiago blows up. So that's the whole thing there. Which is just interesting because the point where the Earth the Centauri pop into the solar system is like essentially during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the solar system, where these like anti-Earth Alliance forces and Earth Alliance forces have like armed themselves to the teeth in this massive like preparation for the Fourth World War essentially, and then suddenly aliens show up and all the armies of the world just look at the aliens like, what do you want from us?
Honestly, I have this picture in my head, like they have a standoff, and okay, if you just move an inch, I will start shooting at you, like this really serious, and you can feel the air, like they're like just before a thunderstorm, and then someone just pops in. Hi, we're the aliens.
Then Londo pops up and is like, my dear old friends, I found our lost colony. Humans, you're great.
And then everyone turns around like, who the fuck are you? And everything is forgotten, and for this moment, and like, oh shit, there's a new player on this ground.
But essentially, it's exactly that. So your initial like reasoning of, oh, we need, like, if there's an external foe, this is usually what unites people. It comes into play in exactly this way, just a little bit delayed, and not perfectly. It's not like humanity is hunky-dory after that and everybody is peaceful and healthy now. But in this moment, it's very much this oh shit moment. And also, like, when we ask ourselves, like, later on, how does the Earth Alliance win the Dilgar War so much? Well, it's partially because we've been arming ourselves to the teeth to kill each other, and then just conveniently stumbled into a different enemy that we couldn't team up against. But this idea that humanity is really at its strongest because it was, like, this close to wiping itself out again. Which, once again, as far as Babylon 5 irony goes, I absolutely love that part.
Totally. Yeah, this I really like this picture in my head right now.
It's a nice one. And I mean, I think as far as milestones go, yeah, this is as far as I got in terms of going through this, because I mean, this is already like 12 pages of lore that we are like condensing violently here into something small, but I think it created like a nice little like compact first chapter for everything, where we started with an idea, and eventually we got there just with a few extra steps. I think that is all quite neatly resolved.
I totally agree, and I think we talked really extensively about...
Yeah, this was a long one as well. This is... I was worried, I just have like 4 major milestones. Is this gonna spawn enough discussion? But no, there's like enough ideas and like storytelling beats just in here that I feel like we've got a lot of to talk about. And I mean, the last thing I can give you is, I already hinted at that, yeah, the next big things are like Earth getting interstellar colonies, Earth stumbling into the Centauri in greater detail, and then into the Dilgar War. So, I mean, who knows when we do the next one of these installments, but we can definitely like pick a few more milestones and talk about these, because yeah, I think all of these stories, even if they're not like exactly explaining to me like when a character was spawned and which circumstances, I think it's still nice to read them and like fill out a little bit of the gaps in there, because there are some neat ideas in there.
Certainly, because yeah, it just gives an idea, okay, what happened or could happen in the time from our position right now and until Babylon 5 comes to existence.
And I think, especially in like now talking with you through this, I've just realized that this a little bit more than even previously. The idea of like taking this perspective that Babylon 5 takes on the future, of saying like, it's not a dystopia, like not everything is bad. We did unite humanity and we have all this cool technology, but that doesn't make things perfect. There's always a caveat with that. Just taking this general sentiment and applying it to history as a kind of guidebook on how this would come about, I think that's a pretty fun formula to do. Like this idea, how do I achieve world peace, in quotation marks, but in a way that nobody is really happy with it, but still has to adhere to it, and then kind of gets into the Babylon 5 project. Like that feels very fitting to me, and that feels like a fun exercise to me.
Yes, it's yeah, a realistic take on this. How would we get from where we are now to this idea of some sort of union, some sort of peace, and still giving space for everything that will not work out. Not an utopian, not a dystopian, but right in the middle where a reality can exist.
And I think it lends itself then also to ask these interesting questions. Like, I don't think Star Trek was ever meant to be a realistic future setting. This is supposed to be an utopia, and I always feel bad hammering on like world building mistakes, quote unquote, or something in there, because like it's not the point to be realistic. But whenever it engages in like long-term world building, it always feels kind of bad to have like, okay, World War III has to happen because we don't have nationalities in Star Trek anymore. We need to get rid of this idea that these like cultural differences are so big that we can't overcome them, so we just erase them all, which just seems like kind of a cheap solution to get to this point of perfect unity, to just like wipe all the nations off the earth entirely. So this idea how Babylon 5 and this book are trying to do this, of saying, well, the nations disappear, but their like different values are still around, and there's still like some governments that try to do shit and stuff. It makes everything so much messier, but then it opens up this question like, yeah, do we want nations to disappear completely? On the one hand, sure, it would be great if we wouldn't have governments that try to fight wars anymore, but then we see here, yeah, but just because the borders are officially gone, that doesn't mean that people are going to stop having these differences then. Is it good to just wash away all the cultural differences, or do we want to have this like multitude of different ideals, even if that means it creates conflict potential? It's just the messiness of it I like.
Yeah, the difference is the key word there, because Star Trek is like, okay, we just take every differences away, we make everyone, the same, equal not equal, but the same, like there are no differences, which is the problematic of this setting, because in this way you say there's no individuality, or a really limited version of this. There is there are not such a thing as different perspectives. There's just this one line of sight where everyone is following, like the sheep, the other one. And Babylon 5 is acknowledging that there will always be some sort of difference, if it is cultural, if it's individual, if it's nations, if it's in this case races. Therefore, it feels just like I could fit in there. I could exist even though it's a fictional fantasy science fiction story, but I could exist there with all my individuals, with my differences, and with Star Trek, I don't think that there's anyone who could realistically imagine himself in this world.
It always comes with this caveat of everybody wants to be a Starfleet officer, and Starfleet is supposed to be this like equal opportunity for everyone, but at the same time, Starfleet Academy is supposed to be an extremely exclusive club that is like very, very harsh to get into. But I mean, we can probably end this discussion on this note, because in Star Trek 6 there is a wonderful line where the big Klingon baddie talks about how the Federation has just this false image of utopia where everybody sits on their porch in this perfect little farmhouse with the Federation flag waving overhead, which is almost point for point the exact same quote that Russia and China give the Earth Alliance in this beautiful book, where they say, oh, you have this beautiful dream about like unifying Earth, you call it United Earth, when really it's just like I guess the Europeans without the French under the Yankee flag and being unified under this banner. And I think this is the crucial difference, where in Babylon 5 this is something that humanity has to hash out among itself, and then on top of that you also have aliens looking at that, whereas in Star Trek the scope is just a different one, where to get this kind of comment you need the alien looking into humanity as a whole and making this kind of statement. And it just reveals there's just different scopes on how to highlight these topics. And I mean, personally, I'm quite fond of the way Babylon 5 does it, but I'm also quite fond of the way Star Trek does it. I don't want to be too mean at all. I think this is a nice place in comparison to end this on, unless I will give you the final words.
We hope you enjoyed our quite extensive discussion, I would say.
it's a lot of ramblings, but on the other hand, I can't think of anyone else having talked this much, this loosely about this book. So I'm happy that it will be put out there, and maybe somebody who actually played with this at some point will get a laugh out of it.
Yeah, or maybe get into this with our video. Who knows? We
Maybe.
overall hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, we hope you see you next time with hopefully a regular episode. And until then,